So hello everybody and welcome to the BIA's Brexit webinar for June 2019. I'm Steve Bates and you'll be joined by Laura Collister, our Brexit lead. We're doing this for several months now, so as you know, it's 132 days till the 31st of October or 559 days to the end of the transition if there is to be a transition. What we're looking to cover today is an update on what's going on in the UK. We've had the European elections, the Prime Minister's resigned, we've got a Conservative leadership contest. We'll go into some detail on trade and regulation. There's some movement there, what's going on in Parliament, and an update on no deal planning. We'll turn to the EU and look at the outcomes of the European Council as they emerge today, the impact of the European elections, and touch on what's going on at the European Medicines Agency, and then explain what we're doing going forwards. In summary, I'll start with the summary because this is what I'm going to go back to. We think the political risk in the UK has risen in recent weeks of a disorderly Brexit. The BIA is seeking further clarity on no deal preparations from the government, and I'll talk about that. And we are looking at engagement on the lack of clarity on that with media and Parliament. The EU is changing its personnel and policy focus as a result of the elections and the new people coming in there. And I'm concerned that Brexit fatigue is hitting just at the time when things are going to get interesting and important. If you follow us regularly, you'll know from last time this is what we looked at. We were probably all exhausted last time, and these are available on our YouTube channel. So if you want to go back to some of this stuff from last month, they are available to all. This one will be available very soon. If you're and if you've got colleagues who aren't able to join at this time juncture, it will be available for the next month on our space. And as you know, I always make sure that people say, Steve, you're talking all about Brexit, you're not talking enough about the sector. Well, remember, the sector is a global leader. It's done very well in terms of raising funds from investors. We're a fantastically resilient, entrepreneurial and resourceful ecosystem. I'm looking forward to seeing many of you at the CEO Investor Forum next week. We're lucky that the UK government has continued to invest in our science infrastructure and our industrial strategy. The sector deals are coming through. And all of these other elements are really the bedrock of our sector and remain come what happens in Brexit. Then people say, well, what are we arguing for on Brexit? And you'll remember that almost, well, over 2 years ago, we got together, sat down, worked out as a group of companies our position, what would be best for the sector. I check in regularly with members that this is still in line with their thinking, and I believe it is. So these are the issues we've held to these positions given to us by members for a fair old while, through thick and thin, and we continue to advocate for them with whatever happens in Westminster, the UK government, the EU, and all the rest of it. So we remain committed to our position, which was developed thanks to members some time ago. This is probably what you're most interested in, what's moved in the UK. And since we were last together, there's been a European election across the whole of the EU. The UK participated. It was a condition of the continuation of the time extension on the Article 50 negotiating period. You can see that it was won by the Brexit Party. The Lib Dems, Greens did particularly well, and obviously the difficult ones were particularly difficult night for both Labour and Conservative, and UKIP's vote transferred in a sense straight to the Brexit Party as the leader went from UKIP to the Brexit Party. People have said that the result of this has left the map of Britain looking a bit like Mr. Burns from The Simpsons. I leave you to judge whether the colours are an exact match, but I think you can see the similarity there. And I suppose the big fallout from this election was that the Prime Minister committed to leave, to step aside at the end of July, and this has triggered a process for a Conservative leadership election, which as of today is a head-to-head contest between Boris Johnson, the former Foreign Secretary and Mayor of London, Jeremy Hunt, current Foreign Secretary, former Health Secretary. From our perspective, the result is due on the 22nd of July, so we have some ongoing uncertainty for a month, 101 days, that will be before the Halloween deadline for Brexit. I think this is a movable feast. We'll see surely further statements as they tour the country, seeking to win the endorsement not of MPs any further, but of Conservative Party members, and we'll then have a process of forming a government at the end of that time. More of that later. But this is a couple of things that might be useful if you don't follow UK politics particularly closely. Boris has said he's not aiming for a no-deal outcome and doesn't think we'll end up with any such thing, but he thinks it's responsible to prepare vigorously and seriously. Has said that the UK will leave by the deadline October the 31st, but wants to renegotiate a deal. Now, he is probably the darling of the Conservative members. He is the clear favourite. He also has the support of the most MPs. Jeremy Hunt, from our sector perspective, was the health secretary who sent the letter a couple of years ago to the Financial Times setting out the government's position on medicines regulation, continued close cooperation. Important to remember that he was one of the signatories of that letter, so has a good grasp of some of the issues we are closest to. He told the Telegraph that a no-deal Brexit would be political suicide for his party, but no deal is better than no Brexit, and also wants to renegotiate the deal and would ask for an extension if the deal was close. So we'll see where this goes. And I'm told by my Star Wars fans and friends that that there's somebody else who's talked about altering the deal. I think this is from the second film. I'm altering the deal, pray I do not alter it any further, was what Darth Vader told the bounty hunter. We'll see whether altering the deal is doable, practicable, or happens, but I think it's where we're at in terms of the rhetoric around the Conservative leadership. And I thought what might be useful to take you through some of the polling, a recent poll this week about where the pollsters think the voice of the Conservative membership are in the UK. If you look at the party membership, this is a poll carried out last week by YouGov, a reputable polling firm, asking Conservative Party members, of which there's about 150,000, who will make the decision as to who's the Prime Minister, would they sacrifice the integrity of the UK and the existence of their own party for Brexit? And the answer is they would rather have Brexit, the purple ones take place, and the outcome below happen, rather than not have Brexit take place. And these, for me, are quite startling for the party of the Union, the party of business. You see here, they'd rather have Scotland leave the UK than not have Brexit. They'd rather have significant damage to the UK economy by 2 to 1 than not have Brexit. They'd rather have Northern Ireland leave the UK by almost 2 to 1 than not have Brexit. They'd rather have the Conservative Party destroyed by 54 to 36 rather than not have Brexit. But they would rather not have Brexit than Jeremy Corbyn, the leader of the Labour Party, become Prime Minister. So I think you can think, if this poll is accurate, it's only one poll, but rather startling, that this is an interesting subset of the UK population that will make the choice for our next Prime Minister, and it may be the context in which these candidates will have to provide promises to get votes. Just a reminder that it's not a straightforward line from winning the Conservative leadership to becoming the Prime Minister. What happens in the UK Constitution is that the outgoing Prime Minister has to suggest to the Queen, the constitutional sovereign, who she should invite to form a government. The expectation would be that the winner of the contest would be invited to visit the Queen. The Queen would ask them to form a government. If they could form a government, the important thing here is that they would, at the moment, the Conservatives are a minority party in the House of Commons. At the moment, they govern with the DUP, a minority party from Northern Ireland. Would that be possible? I refer you to the comments about the Union in the previous slide in the polling. Then they get to appoint their cabinet, and if they have formed a government, put some business before Parliament. At some point, they also have to prioritise writing letters to the Navy, Royal Navy nuclear submarine commanders who maintain UK's independent nuclear deterrent. So there are some other things that are pressing on them in the first days when they come into power, if that is the if that is to be. Then they've got to think about a Brexit strategy, and I suppose the question is, will they go for let's renegotiate, and then how will the EU respond to that, or let's get on with it, we're going to have no deal in 100 days and pull their finger out on the planning there. Who knows? But I imagine that writing letters to the nuclear submarine commanders will still maintain a precedent over Brexit planning. There's been some changes in the other parties as well, we should bring you up to date with. Labour seem to be having an interesting debate around whether to support a second referendum. There was a meeting last week, or this week of the Shadow Cabinet. There's another meeting next week. We'll see where that gets to. So there's rumblings and movement there, but I don't think we've seen a clear declaration yet as to what's coming out of that, but keep your eye on that. The Liberal Democrats have also got a leadership race underway, so we're going to have another new figure emerging. We've put the pictures here of Joe Swinson in the red top, Ed Davey in the purple tie, and the present leader, Vince Cable, in the middle. One of the two on the outside will replace the man in the middle, and that result is also due towards the end of July. And the independent group for change, which was the new breakaway group, has sort of has broke away with itself. 6 of the 11 of them have left, and a leading figure has joined the Liberal Democrats. Others are sitting as independent MPs, and Anna Soubry is now the leader. So quite a lot of movements in the constellation of UK politics, which may also have an impact on Parliament when it comes back to vote on things. Last week we saw a leak of the Cabinet Office planning on Cabinet Office thinking on no deal planning that had gone to government. It was interesting because it talked about our industry. It said the government needed 6 to 8 months of engagement with pharmaceutical industry to ensure adequate arrangements were in place to build stockpiles, and it would take 4 or 5 months to improve trader readiness, and that there was still a long way to go in terms of no deal planning. And I think it's interesting that this was there and may give some insight as to the level of confidence on no deal planning from within the civil service. We've looked to engage on a few issues that have happened in terms of, I suppose, the fallout from this and the ongoing discussion about the future of no deal planning. So there was a policy piece in the Daily Telegraph, if you like, the House newspaper of the Conservative Party, and its membership, which was arguing that medicines wouldn't run out if we left the EU without a deal. I think we've tried to make sure that there's a note of reality into this discussion. We've tried to put the facts of the case. This is an example of the article in the business section that came from a discussion I had with Julia Bradshaw. I suppose the top line here is we've tried to make clear that changing things at very short notice is difficult in an industry like ours. Back to some of the evidence that we've talked about to government and Parliament. And I had the opportunity this week to testify before the EU Select Committee of the House of Commons, also with the Healthcare Distributors Association. You've seen some of this picked up in the media, but I suppose the core point here was I was stressing the impact on patients, public health and life science sector of a no deal, that we need some information urgently on what government plans are for a no deal scenario. We've not yet had information explained to companies around ferry provision and things like that. I tried to provide some facts about how medicine supply chain works. I mean, it's a complicated business if you're in it, and it's an even more complicated business if you're not in it. So tried to make that understandable to Parliament so that it informs the debate, and talked about some of the challenges of operating under the WTO if there are suggestions that a no deal way of operating under a WTO scenario was one way that Britain could go, pointing out the practical challenges of that, like the lack of updating of the pharmaceutical tariff elimination agreement, was some of the types of things we're doing. The full transcript of this is available on the Hansard website. Martin and I were there for about 90 minutes, so there's some quite detail in this. As you know, the government have asked us to engage as a trade association on the medicine supply contingency planning programme. We continue that engagement with officials. It's been a very good and I believe sensible, pragmatic approach. I'm hoping that we can expect some further government communications. As you can understand, the government's operating in a bit of an odd period at the moment with a leadership contest, the discussion about Brexit being at the heart of that discussion, ministers not knowing if they are likely to continue in role or present role or other roles for much beyond the month, and some of the traditional ways in which things would be resolved through the power of the Prime Minister or the Chancellor, obviously in flux as we see a change going on. I think my core point is that we were written to 113 days in advance of the deadline last time round, and we had a clear line of sight prior to that of a likely government direction, both in terms of deal and no deal. The reason I say political risk has gone up, I think it's unclear for us, or less clear now than it was some time ago about that. And it'll be interesting to see whether government feels able to provide guidance. We'd very much like them to provide guidance. The longer we have, the more we are able to do. I realise that 130 days is not the amount of time that you can build a medicines factory or change a regulated supply route. But our view is the more time we have, the more we'll be able to give a pragmatic and practical response to any request from government. The later they leave it, the harder it is for everybody if we were to be in a no-deal scenario. A couple of thoughts on some of the sort of questions that people have put to me and you hear around and about, which is, well, we don't need to worry or plan for no deal because Parliament will stop it. They had a plan last time and they voted for it, and it will be stopped. And I suppose my point here is that's not straightforward, and the composition of Parliament is slightly in flux. There's a recall of an MP today, Conservative MP for Brecon and Radnorshire. We've seen a by-election in Peterborough, and some of these things have gone through on a knife edge in Parliament. So the legal default remains no deal. But this week we also saw, if you like, an attempt by Parliament to pass a cross-party motion to take control of the parliamentary agenda to enable them to do a binding legislation that would rule out no deal. That was backed by Labour and various others, as well as a few Conservatives, but it didn't pass this time and was lost by, as you can see there, 11 votes. So these are close things. So does this mean that this is dead in the water, that Parliament won't stop no deal? I don't think it does, but it means that it's not straightforward, or how this mechanism would happen is not easy to see with both the present parliamentary makeup nor the devices that are in front of them. I think it may take innovation and could depend on some constitutional things that the Speaker of the House would have to do. How that would be happened, I don't know, but it would be interesting to see, and I think we need to keep an eye on it. But it's not straightforward that no deal can be stopped by Parliament. The other side of this, I suppose, is that some people sort of say, well, no deal will lead to speedy free trade agreements, FTAs, and I think that is also highly unlikely. I think if you look at the misconceptions that are around that, people say, well, you could do mini deals and have an FTA like Canada. I think that's very unlikely, particularly if UK exits with no deal and refuses to pay some of the bill in terms of the divorce settlement. My reason for this is an FTA discussion would likely include some demands that are similar to the withdrawal agreement. The UK would be out of all of the agencies, and this is the key one. Under a no deal, any negotiations wouldn't be under Article 50 processes. They'd be under Article 28 or similar processes, which we judge would require unanimous. Well, the rules say they would require unanimous agreement and ratification by all national and several regional parliaments, rather than just simply being agreed by the 27 in the council. It would have to go to all the national parliaments and the regional parliaments. So you can imagine that ratification of that, even if it was speedily done, wouldn't happen very, very, very fast. And we have seen the history of things like the Wallonian Parliament holding up the CETA deal last time round. So the actual mechanism for that to happen is far more problematic than people think. So if no deal was to happen, I think, no deal was hard to stop for the UK Parliament, but also operating under a no deal and getting a quick deal, I think, is for the birds. Another issue that I think people should be aware of coming up, and I don't think this has hit prime time yet, is the knotty issue of how health issues are related to the border in between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. I suppose my window into this is the publication this week by the Common Select Committee of the UK documents relating to a mapping exercise examining North-South cooperation on the island, which was published under Freedom of Information, and I've taken a chunk here, a screen grab from the part which talked about. So this is the UK government's assessment of how things might work with regard to Brexit on the border in Ireland between the movement of medicines, devices, and other healthcare goods. See here, a key part is redacted. I don't know why, but paragraph 81 says the movement of medicinal products and medical devices are governed by EU rules. EU legislation dealing with products and medical devices is extensive, includes a very substantial amount of tertiary legislation. And this is see Annex 1 in relation to an illustrative list of EU legislation. If you want to dig into this, it's available on the internet, the Common Select Committee site. The reason why this matters, I think, is it shows that UK civil servants understand that health issues are a challenging issue on the border with regard to Strand 2 of the Belfast Agreement. So unpicking this or doing a deal at the border is entwined with the workings and functionings of what people know as the Good Friday Agreement. So the border is not simply an issue of cameras, cars, border checks, phytosanitary issues. I think people should be aware that there's a complex element in which the Good Friday Agreement enables cross-border healthcare issues, including issues in our sector, to be dealt with, and these are primarily dealt with under EU legislation, which means that they are at the heart of the complex knot of the border issues. And of course, the backstop, or how Northern Ireland is dealt with, is at the heart of the complex issues that were unable to be resolved, and one of the reasons why Boris Johnson left the cabinet. So backstop or Northern Ireland border issues and health and the Good Friday Agreement and our sector within it are at the heart of one of the most difficult areas that I think will come under pressure in coming weeks. Now, we're lucky in that Mike Thompson of the ABPI has been selected to go on a UK government, which is looking at the Technical Alternative Arrangements Advisory Group, it's called. So they're looking at how you could do this differently on the backstop. I had some experience of working on the Northern Ireland peace process. I know the complexities of the different ways in which that border has operated, and the compromises that were done to get the Good Friday Agreement, the Belfast Agreement together. I don't underestimate the nature of the challenge here. It is complex. It really is difficult. If you look at how paediatric medicines work, if you look at how cardiac centres work in the northwest of the island of Ireland, there's some real difficult and thorny questions here. Regulated products that are prescribed in one country and delivered to patients in another are all issues that will need to be worked through. So I flag it if you're interested in this thing, because I think it is likely to be a big knotty backstop issue as I flag it here. We've seen some discussion also about trade, and I've called this slide Boris Johnson versus Mark Carney. As the leadership candidate at the leaders debate the other day, Boris Johnson stated there will be no tariffs and there'll be no quotas. What we want to do is get standstill in our current arrangements under GATT 24 or whatever it happens to be until such time as we negotiated a free trade agreement. I think what we've seen on that is some pushback on that as a thesis or a practical possibility by none other than the Bank of England Governor Mark Carney today, who does make the case that no deal would result automatically in tariffs between the UK and the EU. So we've got a dichotomy here between a political discussion and an expert view. I think it's important for us to make sure that companies understand not just the headlines promoted by the politicians, but also some other experts in the sector, and tariffs on goods and restriction on free exchange of data, very important for us in terms of things like pharmacovigilance data, clinical trial activity, issues over product standards would have a real economic impact to which the UK would adjust. We continue to raise concerns with the government around the World Trade Organization and the need for grandfathering of free trade agreements for the last 2 years. We're glad that that's on the Department for International Trade's agenda. But it's interesting to hear Trade Secretary Liam Fox now talking about the challenge the WTO is facing, describing it as it could become an existential crisis. This is the main point here is about a failure to appoint new members to the top judges to the appellate body that resolves dispute. If they go below 3 members, they can't resolve cases. That means there's no Supreme Court at the WTO, and that means that how disputes are resolved essentially go to the biggest country fighting with smaller countries. And there are ways of doing it, but I think Liam Fox rightly points out that that would be a substandard way to be operated. We've been concerned about this and been talking about it for a while. Rules of origin in a no-deal scenario without grandfather FTAs are also important in our sector. As you know, pharmaceutical products and others are complex products that we really do need to understand in detail, because it has knock-ons in terms of potential tariffs around the world. And again, we're diving into the detail of this. Laura rightly reminds me that we will shortly be circulating a briefing to MPs around some of the complexities on trade here. Laura, anything else you want to add at this point?
No.
Okay. Regulation. Department of Health and Social Care, DHSC, in the UK are holding a series of roundtables on the future economic partnership and regulatory priorities. We're attending. Thank you if you are coming along, and there's some discussions going on there. We've also pointed out in our call for government for spending review that the UK government may need to provide some additional funding to maintain the excellence in the MHRA, both as they cease to have some of their EMA activity and if the number of applications drops off as the UK goes down the launch priority list. So those are 2 things we're doing on reg, and further updates on those coming forward. Thank you for engaging if you are engaging. Some light and shade. We've got 132 days to go until a no deal at Halloween. Rather than worry about Halloween or ghosts, we thought, what could we do if we're having to dig for victory? Have we got the time to do it? And I think it depends if you're a potato grower. It depends a bit on the time of year and the type of potatoes. Turnips, I think you probably need to get them in the ground this weekend if you're going to be eating those in November. Now, actually, good news. You can get a very, very, very cute porcupine in 112 days. So if you've got 2 porcupines and you can get them together, then you could have a very, very cute pet before Brexit. And of course, we've seen prime ministers come and go in less time than we have until Brexit. Who knows whether the new prime minister will be more successful than Viscount Godric or George Canning in his 1827 apparition as UK prime minister. But I'm delighted that Laura's been able to help us with knowing that we've got a chance on Wales before transition. Still plenty of time for some lovely baby whales to appear before we crash out of the transition period. Handing over onto the EU. What's going on in the EU? Well, this is the European parliamentary results from June across the whole of the Parliament. You can see who's up, who's down. I'm going to come to you for some questions in a minute, so do formulate questions if you've got them. And they will begin sitting next week. European Council's meeting this week. They're talking about who's going to get what top jobs. I think we can see that there's no absolute clarity yet as to what's happening. We watch with interest, but the core point from our perspective is that there's little discussion of Brexit. Perhaps Brexit fatigue has fallen, has happened there. So a little new, although it means the cast of characters that the UK will be engaging with is changing, and the attitudes of those people we don't yet know. We will engage with that as we go forward. There's some interesting data from the European Medicines Agency Management Board's minutes, which they make public, about where they're at and how they're operating. They are anticipating a staff loss of a quarter to a fifth to a quarter, and they've said that many people have relocated, but they've still got quite a few people teleworking from London, and they're still continuing with their not being able to do everything they wanted to be able to do, and they are still working on that. I thought there was an interesting point here that when somebody asked in the management board a specific question on whether supply chain disruption in ports are being considered in the risk and criticality assessment, the EMA replied that these data were not available to the agency and had been outside of scope. So although in terms of no deal planning in the UK, we're thinking heavily about the logistics of border challenges, it doesn't seem to be part of the EMA's thinking. I hope it's being thought of somewhere else in the European Union, because I think a border has two sides, and delay issues on either side would impact the flow of 45 million packs of medicine from the UK to the EU and 35 million in the other direction each month. And as you can see, the data points that the EMA are following on transferring of marketing authorizations, QP on pharmacovigilance, master files and batch release sites, you can see that they're well through many of those ahead of the deadline. I don't think this makes it unchallenging, but you can see much of that work has already moved to new places within the EU 27. I'm going to hand over to Laura to give an update on what we've been focusing on and what we're doing. Laura.
Yep. So just a couple of slides on what we've been working on and what we're working on going forward, just to flag some key things. So obviously, Steve's just been talking about the contingency and the no deal planning. We are still working towards trying to get some clarity in communications for companies and ongoing engagement with the MHRA, especially around the no deal statutory instruments. From last time, as you know, we said we want to be ready for all outcomes. I think basically if there is a deal, we're ready to seek an early deal for medicines and patients. But also if there's no deal, we sort of, as highlighted in some of the media that Steve talked through, we've been pointing out that our members are saying that no deal will have an adverse impact on patients and the sector. We continue to make the case for regulatory participation and why medicines are different. We're doing an increasing amount around trade policy, especially sort of seeing some of the claims around what you can and can't do with the WTO and the Pharma Tariff Elimination Agreement, which was last updated in 2010. So whilst it's there, it isn't up to date. And because all of those issues are sort of coming to the fore a bit more now, we are going to write a briefing for MPs, largely drawn from some papers we wrote about 2 years ago, of which not much has changed since. In terms of some of the future policy environment, we've also been looking at some other issues. So we've done some work with the Home Office, looking at what the future immigration system would look like as part of the white paper engagement. That's going to be an ongoing piece of work. BIA has also submitted to the Adrian Smith review, which is looking at international collaboration and was commissioned by government. We will be ready for when there is a new Conservative leader to highlight our Brexit priorities for the sector. We're also looking at doing more EU engagement and building the profile of the issues around Brexit with the new EU MEPs, specifically, especially the UK MEPs and the new Commission. And in September, we are hoping to do something in Brussels around European Biotech Week. Obviously, all our member and sector engagement continues with the lead networks, the webinars, the website, and engagement through smaller events, and all the governance remains. So the next EU relationship group is coming up on the 22nd of July. So busy week with all the new leaders. We can continue to work collaboratively with government. As I mentioned, we will do a briefing on trade. We'll continue to do briefings around the importance of avoiding a no deal, and we remain a member of the Brexit Health Alliance.
So back to the summary. I hope you can understand why we see the political risks in the UK as high, with changes at the top of the Conservative Party leading probably to a new government. We're seeking further clarity on no deal preparations from the government, which are perhaps a little tardier than they were last time round, and we are not being shy about being concerned about that in the media and with Parliament. And we are watching with interest as the EU changes its personnel and policy focus, whilst being conscious of Brexit fatigue across the board, whether that be in politics or also in member companies. We hope that our Brexit website, www.biabrexit.org, provides you with a one-stop shop for life science company-focused materials. Things that we think are relevant go on there, and I realise there's both a lot of information sometimes and not enough at specifics and the things that you need, but as we find it, we both hopefully take you through it on these webinars, and then have a repository, which is a handy place to start. Sometimes government websites can be hard to get to. So that's the thinking with the website. With that, I'm going to turn it over and see if anybody has any questions for us. Do type them in using the thing. Now, I've got a long one here, so I'm going to endeavour to read it through first and then see if it... So somebody rightly points out that one of the candidates for the leadership has a constituency in Uxbridge that it has a significant employment base of companies in our sector, and are we doing anything there? We're a national association. We don't coordinate at a constituency by constituency level, but if anybody does have one of the candidates as their local MP, or they're a member of the Conservative Party and want to raise any of these issues through their constituency association, I certainly encourage people to make sure the facts of our industry are well known by all candidates, and I think that would be a useful mechanism. So I think I've perhaps not been very clear on why 113 days, or the time we've got left, is not enough time for people to get their preparations together, and people are suggesting why are we concerned? Well, I suppose the thinking here is in the run-up to the last no deal deadline, there was some communication to companies, there was a request to companies, there was clarity around alternative routes, and from my perspective, the time it takes from companies getting information to being able to act on information, to be able to test that within third-party suppliers that they need to engage with, if there are requests to stockpile or increase a stockpile or manage a stockpile differently, those are difficult things for companies that have marketed products to do. And if there is then, you know, the ask for something, and then the time for companies to feed back into a contingency program, and then perhaps alternative arrangements to be made if necessary, all of those things are very hard to do at very short notice, and that's really why you know, we think we're already beyond a point where this will be easy, particularly given that these are global supply chains. For some companies, the UK is not a focus or a priority market, and doing this across all things is not easy to do logistically. Some companies obviously have far more resources, small companies have far less resources, and we realise that this is all a continual burden on business. I know that companies are acting very responsibly. They understand that they have patients at the end of their supply chains. Our ask really is for government to have an understanding of the real world of the logistical challenge that this is for businesses large and small, and what is practicable within a period, because if there are significant changes on paperwork or security procedures or clearances at borders, these are all things that need to be operated in the real world, and time for people to bed these things in and understand them is important. You can't change everything overnight. That's really our core point. Have we seen any trending QPs emigrating out of the UK? I think I'm aware that that much of the QP activity is being done through legal entities that are now outside of the UK. I think that I haven't got evidence of that, and of course there may be, from our perspective, a poor outcome for the sector in that there could be double red tape, a set of red tape for the UK and a set of red tape in the EU in terms of release. That may mean increased opportunities for people in particular roles within the sector. Okay, I think that's about as far as I'm going to go. I realise I've taken 40 minutes of your valuable time. I hope that that's been of use. With that, I'm going to move forward to remind people that we have a number of BIA activities coming up. Our summer reception is the one I think you would all enjoy. Look at that, Tower Bridge. We're in Tower Bridge on the evening of the 11th of July. The great thing about the Tower Bridge is whether the bit at the bottom is up to enable, whether there's a strip of water which has disrupted traffic flows, you can always on Tower Bridge continue to party, because we're in the top bit, which has a glass floor and is a stunning way of seeing London. Do come and join us then. If you're Brexit if Brexit is your thing, we've got the BIA ABPI lead network event on 23rd of July. If you've not gone on holidays by then, the Brexit webinar will return on the 19th of July, and then we've got some other things through September. I think the Reg conference this year is shaping up to be really an important moment. I think if we do have the potential for either regulatory alignment or understanding as to where the future may be going, that could be a really crucial point, and I encourage you to put that one in your diary, because we will get insight from expertise from European regulatory community, the UK regulatory agency and the MHRA, and from people who are really operating in this space. That's a really good one. And then our big autumn conference, October the 17th, the Bioscience Forum, a couple of weeks away from Halloween, will also be useful for knowing where we're going then. If you're not a member and you'd like to join us, we are a membership organisation. John Cludlick would love to hear from you on this email. And with that, I'd like to say thank you very much. Do join us again. We're back to the 4 PM slot on the 19th of July. And I hope you have a good rest of the month. Thank you.